Practically at the instant that Bainan Xiang took a step forward, Duan Ling Tian made a move. Origin energy abruptly skyrocketed on his right hand that was originally behind his back, and then his vast origin energy coiled around the talisman in his hand before he tossed it out towards Bainan Xiang. Swoosh! The talisman itself was light as a feather, and even if origin energy was poured into it, it didn't have the slightest offensive power when flashing out. Bainan Xiang felt rather surprised when Duan Ling Tian attacked first, and when the origin energy in his surroundings condensed into a defensive barrier of light, he noticed a piece of light paper flashing towards him. After a short moment, it descended onto the defensive light barrier around him and was blocked out. What's this? Bainan Xiang frowned. This strange piece of paper before his eyes had something scribbled atop it, and it actually caused him to feel a wave of fear. Perhaps I'm thinking too much. Isn't it only an ordinary piece of yellow-colored paper? Bainan Xiang shook his head before raising it, and his gaze instantly locked onto Duan Ling Tian once more, and he was about to kill Duan Ling Tian. Right when he looked at Duan Ling Tian, he noticed that Duan Ling Tian's gaze was staring fixedly at him, and Duan Ling Tian's gaze was so sharp it caused him to feel a chill run down his spine. It wasn't that he was afraid of Duan Ling Tian, but this sort of feeling had emerged within him for no reason or rhyme. Humph! Bainan Xiang grunted coldly to cover up the feelings in his heart, and then his face was suffused with killing intent as he took another step forward. Whoosh! The origin energy and first-level advanced lightning concept on his body shook the surrounding sky to the point the airflow was in chaos, and gusts of violent winds fluttered out from all directions in great strength. Descend! Right when Bainan Xiang was about to make a move and exterminate Duan Ling Tian, Duan Ling Tian's explosive shout resounded out abruptly. This explosive shout caused Bainan Xiang to be stunned subconsciously. Right at this instant, his pupils suddenly constricted because he saw the seemingly insignificant yellow paper before his eyes had actually vanished strangely from the space before him in an instant. In the next moment, he felt a piercing pain in the spot between his brows, and then his consciousness gradually became blurry before completely vanishing. Even until the moment that his consciousness was completely wiped out, Bainan Xiang didn't know what had happened, whereas the distant Duan Ling Tian was dumbstruck as he watched the scene before him. Along with him shouting out the word descend, he noticed that the talisman he'd thrown out had instantly vanished in the sky, and practically at the exact same moment, a bloody hole had appeared between Bainan Xiang's brows. After the bloody hole appeared, the origin energy on Bainan Xiang's body and the lightning concept that coiled within the origin energy had died down instantly, whereas, Bainan Xiang himself had followed on to drop to the ground without the slightest signs of life. It's done just like that. Duan Lingtian was unable to recover from the shock he experienced from the scene before him even after a long time. After a short moment after Bai Nanxiang's corpse plunged towards the ground did Duan Lingtian recover from his shock, and then he hurriedly flashed in the sky to chase after the corpse. In next to no time, he chased after Bai Nanxiang's corpse and withdrew a violet-colored fragment from within, and it was precisely the first-level advanced lightning concept fragment that had condensed within Bai Nanxiang's body. Subsequently, Duan Lingtian took the spatial ring on Bai Nanxiang's hand. After he obtained his spoils, a violet-colored flame with copper edges skyrocketed on Duan Lingtian's palm with the rays of his hand, and then the flames descended onto Bai Nanxiang's body. Instantly, Bai Nanxiang's corpse transformed into ash that drifted off with the wind and vanished completely in this world. After he put away the spoils, Duan Lingtian stood on the spot without moving. At this moment, his mind was filled with the bizarre scene that occurred earlier. A dignified existence at the first level of the void transformation stage had been so easily annihilated by the talisman left behind by his deadbeat dad. The scene from before gave Duan Lingtian the feeling as if he was dreaming. What talisman was that? Isn't it too heaven-defying? After he returned to his senses, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but be shocked in his heart. Earlier, he didn't see clearly exactly how the talisman had killed Bai Nanxiang. He only saw the talisman vanish instantly, and practically at the exact same moment, the spot between Bai Nanxiang's brows seemed to have been penetrated and directly caused his death. Of course, Duan Lingtian knew clearly in his heart that all of this was a product of that talisman, and it was only because his strength wasn't sufficient that he was utterly unable to catch the exact process of how the talisman killed Bai Nanxiang. The speed of the talisman was so swift that it had already arrived at an astonishing degree. It was even to the extent that Duan Lingtian noticed the air in the area before Bai Nanxiang earlier seemed to not have the slightest movement. Exactly what sort of speed was capable of allowing the air to not be affected? Or perhaps, its affect was so tiny that he was utterly unable to notice it with his current strength. For a time, Duan Lingtian felt his scalp go numb. Where did Dad get these talismans from? Duan Lingtian laughed bitterly. At this moment, he suddenly felt that his deadbeat dad was so unfamiliar. At the same time, his heart was filled with questions. Dad's body obviously didn't possess any trace of origin energy. Even if he's a martial emperor stage expert, if he didn't resist the detection of my spiritual force, I'd normally be able to use my spiritual force to notice his origin energy. But I can be sure that Dad's body does indeed not have a trace of origin energy. Duan Lingtian was unable to wrap his head around this no matter how he racked his brains, and he suddenly felt that his dead beast dad was even more mysterious. Logically speaking, it's impossible for Dad to not know that the world outside the Darkhan dynasty is dangerous, yet he still brought along Mom and the others and left the Darkhan dynasty. Duan Lingtian recalled his father's departure, the 3 talismans his father had left for him, and the mysterious exquisite jade box. Perhaps, some unbelievable events had occurred on him during those 23 years that he went missing. At least, I can be sure now that he'd absolutely not a martial artist with a crippled Danshan. When he thought up to here, Duan Lingtian's thoughts continued to drift off. The scenes when his father returned all those years ago flashed one by one within his mind. From the moment he'd seen his father in the Duan clan estate to the moment he returned home with his father, and then some incidents that occurred later, he didn't leave anything out. At that time, Duan Lingtian continued to recall and unknowingly recalled the scenes when the 3 great guardian elders of the Azure Forest Trisect had arrived at the Crimson Sky Kingdom. At that time, even though Peak Master Qin Xiang was present as well, but she was far from being able to be a match for Zhao Ming's group of 3. At that time, for the sake of protecting his life, he'd convinced Zhao Ming's group of 3 that he knew the location of the 10,000-year stalactite milk while having the intention of leaving with Zhao Ming's group of 3 before finding an opportunity to escape. Of course, doing so was extremely risky, and the slightest mistake would could him to become a corpse under the hands of Zhao Ming's group of 3. But at that time, he had no other choice. However, right at that critical moment, a low and hoarse voice had suddenly sounded out, and then the owner of the voice hadn't shown himself yet had easily used his imposing aura to press down on Zhao Ming's group of 3 to the point they were unable to catch their breaths. After that, under the mysterious expert's ability that was sufficient to crush Zhao Ming's group of 3, even though they were unwilling, they could only flee. At that time, Duan Lingtian thought the owner of the hoarse voice was a mysterious expert that lived in seclusion within the Crimson Sky Kingdom that couldn't bear the sight of Zhao Ming's group of 3, so he saved Duan Lingtian in the process. Now it would seem that it's very likely that mysterious expert was dead. At that time, I didn't think like this and overlooked an important problem. The owner of the hoarse voice was obviously intentionally suppressing his voice and seemed to be unwilling to reveal his true identity. Duan Lingtian couldn't help but guess, and the more he guessed, the surer he was. At that time, Dad ought to have been within my courtyard house while he lent a hand. But this level of ability seems to not be something an ordinary martial artist can execute. When he thought up to here, Duan Lingtian started to search through the memories of the Rebirth Martial Emperor. In next to no time, his pupils constricted, and he confirmed one thing. According to the memories of the Rebirth Martial Emperor, only an expert that has stepped into the Martial Emperor stage could use one's acute spiritual force to control one's origin energy and project one's voice out while being a few hundred meters away. Moreover, one could use one's imposing aura to suppress others from a few hundred meters away. As he muttered, Duan Ling Tian couldn't help but gasp. Dad. Could it be that Dad's really a Martial Emperor stage expert? Duan Ling Tian was completely dumbstruck. After a while, Duan Ling Tian recovered from his shock and recalled the scenes when his deadbeat dad, Duan Ru Feng, had just returned. Perhaps, the reason I didn't detect any origin energy within Dad's body was because he utilized some sort of method to intentionally conceal it. After all, Cloud Continent is so vast that there's no lack of some secret techniques that are capable of concealing one's aura and origin energy. The more he thought about it, the more certain Duan Ling Tian was, and then he laughed bitterly. Looks like I've been completely deceived by Dad. Now, he was practically able to confirm that his father was most probably an expert at the Martial Emperor stage or above. I wonder what exactly Dad encountered during those 23 years. He actually possesses such a shocking strength. Besides that, he's even capable of leaving such heaven-defying talismans to me. Suddenly, another 2 talismans appeared in Duan Ling Tian's hand, and they were the last 2 he possessed. Wait. Suddenly, he seemed to have recalled something, causing Duan Ling Tian to frown and shake his head. If Dad really is an expert at the Martial Emperor stage, then why didn't he bring me along to the foreign lands? Is he really my real father? Just leaving me like this on my own in the Darkhan dynasty? As he muttered to himself, Duan Ling Tian was slightly speechless. Even though his deadbeat dad, Duan Ru Feng, being a Martial Emperor stage expert was only his guess, yet he felt that his guess should be close to the truth. If his father didn't possess a shocking strength, how could his father dare take the risk to bring along his mother and leave the Darkhan dynasty? Perhaps, Dad wants me to gain more experience and tempering by staying in the Darkhan dynasty. The message he left behind in the void transmission jade slip spoke of meeting in the future. Perhaps the outside world he spoke of ought to be the foreign lands. Duan Ling Tian guessed in his heart. When he thought up to here, even though Duan Ling Tian was much more at ease, he couldn't help but be slightly resentful. Dad is really too disappointing. If he's really an expert at the Martial Emperor stage, shouldn't he take me along and allow me to show off in the foreign lands? Who would dare offend the son of a Martial Emperor stage expert? Forget about not taking me along, he didn't even leave me like a million high-grade origin stones and spirit fruits used by void interpretation stage and void transformation stage experts.